what a fraction is, and so on. Some of the computer games involve really complicated arithmetic and math. Playing almost any game in which you're keeping score requires that you can add, sometimes requires that you can take averages, and so on. Doing anything with money requires manipulations. The kind of math that all of us use in our culture and all of us remember, they're picking up in the course of their play. And they are also, in the course of their play, developing special interests. Not all of them, but many of them. I would say about half of them are developing real passions in areas that then they go on to make a living at as their career. I talked a little bit about that yesterday in the open session that I held. But, and I will avoid repeating those examples, but I could give many examples of cases where children played at something and then they went on into adulthood and earned a living doing the very same thing that they were playing at as children. Now, what I want to do, what I want to conclude with is to describe, if you're looking on the handout, we're at letter D here, the optimal context for self-education, how Sudbury Valley School is like a hunter-gatherer band. And I've listed 6 things here. And I want to describe briefly each of those characteristics of Sudbury Valley School that's like a hunter-gatherer band. My argument is these are the conditions that optimize children's abilities to educate themselves. And as I go through these, I want you to think about the fact that in our typical schools, none of these conditions are present. Every single one of them is stripped away from the child. It's as if we, in our typical schools, deliberately take away children's abilities to educate themselves so that we can educate them instead, because we don't trust them. We think they'll learn the wrong things if they educate themselves. If you trust children, you don't take away their ability to educate themselves, you optimize their ability to educate themselves. So here are the conditions. Number 1 is the social expectation and reality that education is the child's responsibility. Every normal child comes into the world believing it's their responsibility. Throughout history, it was their responsibility. Every instinct they have tells them it's their responsibility. But we can destroy that if we take it away from them. If we give them the impression that we are in charge of their education instead of they are in charge of their education, we can take that self-educative drive away from them. So that's the first characteristic. Second characteristic is unlimited freedom to play and explore and pursue their own interests. Unlimited freedom. Not an hour a day, not 2 hours a day, not 4 hours a day, all the time. They need time to immerse themselves in things. They need time to try different things. As Henry said, they need time to get bored and to overcome boredom. They need time, and that's what hunter-gatherers give them, is time and freedom. And that's what Sudbury Valley gives them, is time and freedom. And that's what we've taken away from children almost every place else. The third characteristic is opportunity to play with the real tools of the culture. Hunter-gatherer children don't just play with toys made for children. They play with fire, they play with machetes, they play with bows and arrows, they play with digging sticks. And they become good at using these things. These things become extensions of their own bodies because they're allowed to experiment with them, do their own thing with them, play with them. That's what play means, doing your own thing with it. At Sudbury Valley, there are different tools. It's not bows and arrows, although sometimes people might get interested in bows and arrows. What's the biggest tool in our culture? Unquestionably the computer. For an adult to deprive children of computer time in our culture today would be like a hunter-gatherer depriving a child of bow and arrow time in a hunter-gatherer culture. Children are, of course, naturally drawn to the computer. Every child comes into the world in our culture and says, if there's one thing I've got to know for success as an adult, it's a computer. I better be good at that computer. They don't say that consciously, but in their bones, that's what they know, and they see it. And so, of course, they spend enormous amounts of time on the computer. Not all children, but most of them. But not just computers. There's other tools. There's cooking equipment. There's outdoor sporting equipment. There's woodworking equipment. These are not so important for everybody to know in our culture, but for some people to know. And they're available, and children play with those things too. Fourth characteristic, access to a variety of caring adults who are helpers, not judges. There's a number of things. Let me unpack that statement. Number one, a variety of caring adults. Not just one adult. Not just two adults, like two parents, but a number of adults. Sudbury Valley has only 7 of them, but each of them are different kinds of people. They have different personalities, different skills. You're not assigned to any of these adults. You can go to any of those adults that you want to. If you need a shoulder to cry on or a lap to sit on, you go to this person. You'd never go to that person for that. But if you want to have an argument about politics, you go to that person who's very good in arguing politics. You figure out who to go to meet your needs. But mostly you're going to other kids anyway. But when you do need to go to an adult, there's a variety of different adults to go to. And here's the key. Those adults are not judging you. You can't be fully honest with somebody who's judging you. When you are in a typical school, do you want to admit your ignorance to the teacher who is going to decide whether you pass or fail? No. You go into impression management mode. You want to present what you know. You want to hide what you don't know. You want to hide your weaknesses. But that's the opposite of what you need to do if you're going to learn. If you're going to learn, you have to be free to fail. You have to be free to show your weaknesses. But it's very hard to do that to somebody who is judging you. And it's the non-judgmental nature of the relationship that allows children in a hunter-gatherer culture or at the Sudbury Valley School to feel completely comfortable with the adults that they're going to. Fifth characteristic, and I think this is the most important one of all, free age mixing among the children and adolescents. Sudbury Valley School would not work if everybody were the same age, or if everybody even were within just 2 or 3 years of the same age. The reason it works is because the little kids are learning from the bigger kids, and the bigger kids are learning from the littler kids. Let me describe, much of my own research has focused on the value of age mixing. And let me just summarize the value of age mixing for the younger children in the interaction and for the older children. When a younger child is playing with an older child, it's always an educational experience because the older child is always boosting the younger child up to a higher level of play. The older child might be teaching the younger child to read if there's reading involved in this game, or how to add up a score if there's scores involved in the game, or how to get a boost up into the tree and climb a tree if it's a tree climbing game, how to catch a ball if it's a throwing game. It's impossible for children that are different in size, ability, wisdom, strength, and so on to play together without the younger child learning something from it. It happens all the time. Moreover, even when they're not playing together, the younger children are learning just by watching the older children. I once did, or some of my undergraduate students did, a study of learning to read at the school. And one of the students who had learned to read at the school put it very succinctly. He said, in response to the question, why did you learn to read when you did? He said, well, you know, I saw these kids who were a couple of years older than me, and they were reading books, and they were talking about the books they were reading, and they were laughing together. And I was so jealous of them. I wanted to join that club. And I think that he put it so beautifully, but I think that's kind of the way it works for a lot of kids. They want to join that club of older kids, and that means being able to do what the older kids can do. For the older kids, what are they learning? They're learning something that I would argue is even more important. They're learning how to be caring, how to be nurturant, how to help other people. What could be more important than that? The presence of little kids brings out the nurturing instinct in older kids. There's actually a lot of data on this. When we deprive teenagers of the opportunity to interact with younger children, much younger children, we are depriving them of the opportunity to learn how to be caring and loving and nurturant, to learn how to be good parents themselves when they're ready to become parents. So what they are learning is every bit as important as what the younger children are learning. Also, the younger children are always creative and active and doing things outdoors. So you've got this teenager who comes to the school and he's, as Henry would have said, oh, I'm just so bored and there's nothing to do here. And so some little kid, some 4-year-old comes up to him and says, give me a piggyback ride. Well, how can you resist that? How can you continue to be a cynical, bored teenager when a 4-year-old is asking for a piggyback ride? The 4-year-olds inspire and energize. The little kids inspire and energize the older kids and keep them creative because they are so creative. The sixth characteristic, I used to say there were 5 characteristics. I've added a 6th characteristic, which I've come to think of is also equally essential. And that's this: immersion in a stable, moral, democratic community. Because by being in such a community, you grow up learning to care not just for yourself, learning to care not just to be responsible for yourself, but to be responsible for your community. You get involved in discussions about what's a fair law and not a fair law. You get involved in discussions of guilt and innocence. What kind of punishment should this person have? And you can't help but begin to care about your community. You get involved in discussions that go like this. All right, so this new student who's come is bringing alcohol on campus, and he's drinking on campus. What should we do about that? The school board will close the school down if they discover that there's illegal activity going on here in this school. And nobody wants the school to be closed down. So there's great discussion. What are we going to do about this kid who could cause the school to be... These are the kinds of discussions they get into. They're not talking about the war in some other country. They're not debating whether Donald Trump would ruin the United States of America. They're not debating those issues. They're debating issues at their child level in their community that will then allow them to go on to the larger community, bringing to bear the caring about a community and the skills it takes to be able to argue effectively and learn about and understand the situations in the larger community. So again, let me say that these are the characteristics of Sudbury Valley, and I'm sure that if you think about it, you'll realize that none of them exist in a typical school. Now, as I expected, I only made it through half of the handout. And those of you who are interested in the second half of the handout, I would be willing to hold an open session this afternoon if somebody schedules it at some time other than 3 o'clock, because at 3 o'clock I want to go to Henry's open session. So if somebody would schedule that, if you're interested in the second half of this handout, How Children Learn Through Play, I would be very happy to do that. I love to talk about it and would be happy to do that. Now, before I conclude, since I am the last speaker, the last official speaker, I have the opportunity to do something that I really do want to do. And that is the opportunity to ask you to applaud, not yet, to applaud the following groups of people. To applaud the people who organized this conference, who did such a wonderful and conscientious job of creating the first ever Asian Pacific Democratic Education Conference. I want you to And this is going to be very hard for the translators. Not yet. Hold the applause, because we're going to do it all together for everybody. I'm going to include in the applause the translators. And they're going to have to translate what I'm saying right now, and it's going to be hard for them because they're very modest people. They have done a heroic job. I have such great admiration for the job that they've done in simultaneously translating. Not that I can judge it, because I don't, but it is just amazing to me. And certainly when the translations have been into English, I've been very, very impressed by that. I want to include in this applause, I actually made a list, let me make sure. I want to include in this applause the speakers who came from, in some cases like me, from the other side of the world, who came here to speak, to be at this first ever conference. And most of all, I want to include in the applause all of you. And you are people who are pioneers. You are people who are pioneers in creating a better world for children. And it takes courage to do it, because it takes courage to do anything that runs counter to what everybody else is doing. It takes often enormous courage to do that. And you are part of what is going to happen to make the world better for children, a better place for children, a happier place for children, and a place where children once again, as they did in hunter-gatherer cultures, are going to be able to use their natural instincts, their natural ways of behaving to educate themselves. So please join me in applause for all of these groups.
Give it up to Gray once again. Shortly after, right over there, Dr. Gray, we have brought Dr. Gray's book, Free to Learn, and he will be sitting there doing his book signing. If you're interested, you could go there. But before we do that, that's one last thing. Dr. Peter Gray just remind us one very, very important thing. So I would like to officially introduce you 6 very important partners of this conference. Please be patient. Let me take them out here. I hope you enjoy our keynote speeches. We're doing our best, even though we have a lot of technical problems with translation. 我希望你们很享受我们这个礼拜1周下来的所有的主题演讲。虽然我们有很多技术上、器材上的困难，但是希望你们能喜欢。那我们今天能在这边提供大家中文、日文、韩文跟英文。The reason why you can hear English, Japanese, Korean, and what? Chinese. It's because of them. Please come forward. Please give them that standing up. ovation. I think they deserved it. Okay, and now, so the keynote speech is over, and a lot of people have open space, okay, and book signings over there, okay, so I'll see you soon. Goodbye.